This building was constructed in 1984 at 550 Madison Avenue in New York City. Right away, people began calling it the Chippendale Skyscraper because, well, it looks a lot like a super-scaled piece of antique bedroom furniture, specifically the kind called a highboy. They're basically tall dressers that are set on legs, and they were popular in the 18th century in England and in the US.
And everything we made had to be typical of our growing spirit of freedom.
But why would anyone design a skyscraper to look like a piece of furniture? Did they just, run out of ideas? Or is there something fundamental about skyscrapers that's more like furniture than it seems like at first glance? Well, I actually think it's a little bit of both. The Chippendale Skyscraper and highboy look similar at the top, where they both have a form of a pediment. That's the triangular piece that would normally be at the end of a gabled roof. On the highboy, the decorative arch or wooden scroll piece is actually called a bonnet or a hood. They can also be referred to as a swan's neck, especially when it's a double curve, like the two graceful swans facing one another. Even though they look similar, the two features actually come from different places. On highboys, the swan neck comes out of the Queen Anne period, when heightened levels of craftsmanship and new woods like mahogany made this kind of thing possible. Books like Thomas Chippendale's The Gentleman and Cabinet Maker's Director helped to standardize the practice of making these things, and then the fancy top became a sort of status symbol, showing how wealthy you were and how hip you were to the tenets of good tastes at the time. The Chippendale Tower, on the other hand, has really none of that. It's just a normal skyscraper with a fancy shape on the top. It isn't curvy in this application either, so it might be called a broken pediment, which describes the fact that the two slopes don't actually meet in the middle. The pitch, which is, normally for shedding water from the top of the building, it doesn't really do that here. It does hide the mechanical equipment, but if ice flowed off of something like this, it would kill someone on the street level. So the roof itself actually pulls away from the facade to catch that ice at first. Instead of the angles coming together at the peak, there's a circular cutout. It's a way of setting up an expectation and then denying it. Like a way the joke will set up the expected next line, but then subvert it with something unexpected.
I like rice. Rice is great when you're hungry and you want 2,000 of something.
Of course, when people called it the Chippendale Skyscraper, they meant it pretty disparagingly. This was the first skyscraper designed in the relatively newly developed postmodern way of consciously incorporating historical-looking elements into an otherwise contemporary design. I don't think that the building's architect, Philip Johnson, intended the building to look like a piece of furniture. The broken pediment was actually a feature of classical architecture in buildings way before it was adopted by furniture. But Johnson wasn't going to let the critics win, so he embraced the name. He began claiming that it was the world's first Chippendale skyscraper. He also embraced it literally in this photograph of him hugging a model of the building. Over time, the public began embracing it too, almost entirely because of its furniture twin. It was recently saved from an aggressive renovation project by a public preservation campaign. This flow of ideas between furniture and architecture, it's pretty common actually. Here in Chicago, the Civic Opera Building is a limestone skyscraper with a 45-story office tower that's actually flanked by two 22-story wings. These three elements are arranged so that the building looks like a gigantic throne that faces west toward the Chicago River. This design was intentionally made to look like this by its developer, Samuel Insull, who was actually played by Tom Holland in the movie Current War.
Yes.
But interestingly, the form was motivated almost completely out of spite. Years earlier, the developer's wife was in a Broadway musical that was panned by a New York critic who called her an aging, hopelessly incompetent amateur. So he built his very own opera house in Chicago for his wife to perform whenever she wanted. It's her throne, always with its back to New York. These two skyscrapers look like pieces of furniture, and both came upon this through not-so-welcome circumstances. In some ways, their origins are from a lack of ideas of sorts. Making the skyscraper look like furniture or getting mistaken for it was a way for the building to tell a story to either a specific person or an audience. In one case, the story is for people who know about the history of architecture and they can read it in the tower, and then the other is for a single New York theater critic. But there was a time not too long ago when architects and designers would openly make skyscrapers like furniture for everyone to understand.
But good design is only one of the important ingredients of good furniture.
And you've probably seen a lot of it too. It's actually called Midcentury Modernism. From spoons to cities was one of its catchphrases. It was coined by the architect Ernesto Rogers, who at the time would find himself designing a spoon, a chair, and a lamp, and in the same day he'd be working on a skyscraper. Here's a few examples. Chair, skyscraper. But the phrase isn't about him. It's more of a battle cry for a way of thinking about the world and the role that design should play in it. Nothing is too big or too small to benefit from good design, and as a society, every scale should matter. You can learn as much about a society for how its spoons are made as much as you can from its cities. The spoon city thing was codified into an important document called the Athens Charter, which laid out principles prepared by the International Congress of Modern Architecture. This was a collection of dozens of different architects, including Rogers, who were looking to try and fix the problems with cities at the time, and they were hugely influential during the middle of the 20th century. Many of the members designed furniture and skyscrapers. Le Corbusier, skyscraper, chair. Walter Gropius, skyscraper, chair. Mies van der Rohe, skyscraper, chair. Eero Saarinen, skyscraper, chair. Marcel Breuer, skyscraper, chair. Of course, it's not only skyscrapers either. You also have chair-house combos like the Eameses or Gerrit Rietveld. Or literally cities and spoons. Even today, one of the designers of Neom's The Line has a line of spoons. But all these examples of skyscrapers and furniture, none of the skyscrapers really look like the furniture. But that doesn't mean that they don't share a common ethos of design and then maybe also share some similar features and qualities. You can spot those shared qualities pretty readily in furniture that you might have or skyscrapers that you're familiar with if you know where to look. So let's check out a few examples. This is the Barcelona chair, designed in 1929 by Mies van der Rohe. It features metal legs and tufted leather pads. Just look at the typical lounge chair from this era, and the uniqueness of this design is completely striking. But what exactly is at play here? Well, let's start with the legs. They start life as a simple, solid rectangular steel. Then they're bent and welded together. These welds are then grounded down until the legs look like metal curves that cross over one another, rather than, the different bars deflecting past one another. They're also coated in chrome and then polished to a mirror finish. Those simple metal pieces come together without any visible fasteners. They're not bolted together, for instance. Their shapes also look as though they could extend and then keep going forever. The legs could easily visually continue on. The curves are rigorous geometric constructions that follow simple, square, and circular relationships. The pads too have this kind of quality that they could just as easily keep going in every direction. The tufting is produced by stitching together rectangular leather pieces and then threaded with these buttons. The grid of the tufting is perfectly aligned with the border of the pad, so it kind of de-emphasizes the boundary line. The grid looks like it's cut out of something much larger. Two pads are then stitched together, and they just kind of lay on top of the metal frame, which acts like a spring for added comfort. The chair never really embraces the person who's sitting in it. It's more like a series of planes that just support you or prop you up, not enveloping you. These things are true for a Mies skyscraper too. It's also made of steel. It uses standard, off-the-shelf shapes. Mies van der Rohe also sometimes makes columns as chromed crosses too. Either way, the structure isn't hidden behind anything, and every slender steel member is put on display. And there's no visible fasteners. In both the chair and the skyscraper, reflections also play a big role in the design. With the chair, the chrome reflects the floor or the darkness of the leather, turning the legs into calligraphic strokes. In the tower, glass reflects the city during the day, and then at night allows for the interior to shine to the outside. Of course, in the skyscraper, the grid is present too, both in the overall height of the building on its facade, as well as on the floors that also extend outward to suggest a universal spatial expanse. That's very different from another chair skyscraper pair by the architect Eero Saarinen. This chair, known as the Womb chair, was designed by Saarinen in 1946, and it too has chromed steel structural supports, but they're very different here. Curvature isn't so geometrically defined, there's more fluidity from one area to the next. And the curves in the seating portion go in two directions instead of just one. This allows the chair to wrap around you like a cocoon in all directions. Underneath the fabric and the foam layers is a shell that's made out of fiberglass. But you don't actually see that structural component of the chair, you only feel its effects. The glass wool for fiberglass had only been discovered about 10 years before the design of the chair. It was a high-tech material at the time, and it allowed the designers to create more complex shapes much more easily and cheaply. The glass fibers or cloth are laid onto a form, which is then covered in resin and allowed to harden. The fibers and the resin work together to create a strong shell structure. The room chair is probably most easily compared to Saarinen's famous TWA terminal. It's probably one of the most elegant concrete buildings ever designed. Concrete is a fluid material, and like fiberglass, it can also take almost any shape. But instead of glass, it uses reinforcing steel, and instead of resin, it uses cement. But in both, Saarinen was exploring complex curvature that envelops its inhabitants. Saarinen did design a skyscraper too, and while it isn't all curvy, it does share some key concepts to the womb chair. It's the CBS Tower in Manhattan, designed in 1961. First, Saarinen's tower is made of granite on the outside, which is covering the concrete structure and core. This shell and core strategy is similar to the fiberglass wrapped structure of the womb chair, and in contrast to the steel structure of Mies. The perimeter of the building is lined with these triangular structural elements that jut out like a spiked collar. These create the perception that the facade is extremely thick and heavy. It's not flat like Mies's one. And maybe this is similar to the chair too, that bends to create a deep pocket for people to sit inside of. The triangles also kind of soften and break up the overall boxiness of the building. The thickness of the envelope protects the people inside with a box that looks like it's made of a single, heavy, protective, and strong material. Overall, the entire mid-century modern movement has a lot of similarities to that swan neck Chippendale top. For both, there were mostly like 4 things at play. Firstly, there was a newly improved techniques for making things. Then second, there were new materials. Third, there was a spread of this design in media. And then they both became like a status symbol. This is exactly what's happening in the chairs and skyscrapers of Mies and Saarinen too. They're exploring new ways of making and the role for new materials at all scales. We didn't really talk about the media aspect, but mid-century modernism became popular because it was spread in the recently ubiquitous TV and magazines of the 1950s and 60s. Even Playboy extolled the virtues of this approach. This is all pretty much how all styles develop. At first, it's not really a style at all. There are pragmatic reasons for certain decisions that are being made. Only later do the aesthetic and functional decisions become divorced from their original intent. For instance, today, it's not so simple to create a mid-century chair or even a Mies-like skyscraper just due to changes in how things are constructed. Just check out a video that I made about a Mies building built 2 years ago, 60 years after it was designed. And just look how expensive mid-century modern furniture is today. Even though it was originally intended to be cheap and easily available. During those decades of the 20th century, chairs and skyscrapers were driven by the same motivations as one another, but they didn't really look alike. From spoons to cities doesn't mean that cities should look like spoons. In Mies and with Saarinen, the chairs were designed first, then the skyscrapers second. This makes sense since a chair is easier to entrust with a young person than a full-blown skyscraper. But that's not the important point. The chair and the building could have come at the same time. Furniture often begets skyscrapers. In architectural design, there's an exchange between form and function, history and technological progress. Furniture and skyscrapers, in some ways, feel like they're miles apart. Sometimes they resemble each other, but in other times, there's a deeper translation that masks underlying commonalities. You can find those hidden commonalities, though, if you look a little bit more closely. Whether it's a chair meant for a single person or a skyscraper meant for thousands of people, the core tenets of aesthetics and functionality and symbolism, they remain pretty consistent. The fluidity between scales, from spoons to cities, it just shows how universally good design thinking can be applied. This video is supported by Nebula, who is absolutely instrumental by supporting me to do deep dives into chairs and skyscrapers or to travel to places like Columbus, Indiana. Look out for that one in my next video. And selfishly, that's just awesome, but then I get to share it with you, so it's a win-win. For those of you that don't already know, Nebula is a video streaming platform owned by the creators that are on it. Sam at Wendover Productions, Real Engineering, Not Just Bikes, City Beautiful, and many more of the folks that you watch are a part of it. It is by far the best place for viewing the videos that we make and to support me and, well, all of us if you feel so inclined. Subscribers to Nebula also get early access to our videos, and the viewing experience is top-notch and will never show an ad. Also, there's content on there that just isn't on YouTube or anywhere else for that matter. Sometimes I make full-on companion videos of interviews or things that just didn't make it into YouTube, like the extended tour of Marina City. There's also Nebula Originals, like real-life lore's Modern Conflicts. Who knows, maybe I'll have one on there soon. And there's classes where creators share behind-the-scenes insights into their process, giving you an opportunity to learn about how the Friday Checkout makes a video, or how Foreign tells stories, or how Patrick Willems makes movies. You can gain access to this world of amazing videos simply by clicking on the link on the screen or in the description. It's only $2.50 per month when you sign up for a year. Not only will you unlock the entire catalog of treasures of your favorite YouTubers, but you'll also support me in producing the content that explores the built environment that we inhabit.